For most people, attending a rock concert is one of life's great pleasures. The lights, the sound, the electricity of 50,000 strangers becoming one crowd. But for some performers, the stage was never entirely safe. Obsession, jealousy, and unchecked devotion have turned fans into threats, sometimes with devastating consequences. If the intersection of rock music history and the wild, unpredictable world of celebrity life interests you, consider subscribing so you never miss a video like this. Number 10. Dimebag Darrell Abbott. December 8, 2004, should have been just another night. Dimebag Darrell, the beloved guitarist of Damageplan and formerly of Pantera, was 3 songs into the band's set at the Alrosa Villa Club in Columbus, Ohio, when a gunman named Nathan Gale rushed the stage and opened fire at close range. Darrell died instantly. 3 other people were killed that night before a Columbus police officer ended the attack. The shock inside the rock community was total. Dimebag was 40 years old, universally adored, and widely regarded as one of the most gifted guitarists of his generation. Many fans noted with grief that he was killed on the same calendar date John Lennon had been shot 24 years earlier. Investigators later determined that Gale, who had been discharged from the Marines, harbored a delusional belief that Pantera had somehow stolen his lyrics, a grievance with no basis in fact that had festered into homicidal rage. The Alrosa Villa later placed a memorial at the spot where Darrell fell, and tributes poured in from virtually every corner of rock music. He was buried with one of Eddie Van Halen's guitars, a gesture that said everything about the esteem in which his peers held him. Number 9. John Lennon. By the winter of 1980, John Lennon had spent years navigating the paradox of fame. He was one of the most recognized human beings on the planet, and he had largely accepted that reality with cautious grace. On the evening of December 8th, he and Yoko Ono returned to their home at the Dakota building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Mark David Chapman, a 25-year-old man who had spent months fixating on Lennon, was waiting outside. Chapman had actually approached Lennon earlier that day and had Lennon sign a copy of his album. 4 shots ended John Lennon's life on that sidewalk. He was 40 years old. Chapman later described his obsession with Lennon as rooted in a perceived hypocrisy, a man who sang about having no possessions while living in considerable wealth. The specific album Chapman had carried to the Dakota that morning was Double Fantasy, released just 3 weeks earlier in November of 1980. Chapman had flown to New York from Hawaii with the explicit intention of committing the murder, having briefly returned home before flying back to carry it out. He was sentenced to 20 years to life and has been denied parole 13 times as of this recording, with his most recent denial coming in August of 2023. The attack fundamentally changed the way the music industry thought about artist security, and the Dakota has remained a place of quiet pilgrimage for fans ever since. Number 8. Bjork. Not every attack required physical proximity. In 1996, a Florida man named Ricardo Lopez became consumed by a disturbing obsession with Bjork after she began a public relationship with musician Goldie. Lopez spent months constructing a sulfuric acid device disguised as a book, intending to mail it to Bjork's home in London. He filmed himself throughout the entire process, producing hours of deeply unsettling footage. Before the package could be delivered, Lopez took his own life on September 12, 1996, leaving behind a note directing police to his videos. Officers contacted Scotland Yard, who intercepted the package before it reached Bjork. The incident shook the music world and prompted renewed conversations about the dangers of celebrity obsession. Bjork was in London when she learned what had nearly happened. The device Lopez built was sophisticated enough that forensic analysts confirmed it would have delivered a serious mysterious acid spray upon opening, likely causing permanent disfigurement or blindness. The approximately 18 hours of video he left behind documented his psychological deterioration in real time over several months, beginning with relatively composed monologues and ending in a state of complete dissolution. She later spoke publicly about the psychological toll of that period, and the recordings Lopez left behind have since been studied by researchers examining the psychology of stalking behavior. The line between devotion and danger, the case made clear, was sometimes terrifyingly thin. Number 7. Frank Zappa. The Rainbow Theatre in London had seen some extraordinary nights by December of 1971. What it had not seen was anything quite like what happened to Frank Zappa on the 9th of that month. During a performance, a man in the audience named Trevor Howell pushed through the crowd and shoved Zappa off the stage and into the concrete orchestra pit below, a drop of roughly 15 feet. Howell reportedly acted out of jealousy, believing his girlfriend was attracted to Zappa. Zappa survived but sustained serious injuries, including a fractured leg, a broken rib, and head trauma. He spent weeks in a wheelchair recovering, and the ordeal kept him largely off the road for months. Howell was convicted of grievous bodily harm and sentenced to 1 year in prison, a penalty that struck many in the music community as insufficient given the severity of the injuries he caused. When he returned to performing, his voice had dropped noticeably, a lasting physical consequence of the fall. The attack did nothing to temper Zappa's prolific output. He continued recording and touring for more than 2 decades, but those closest to him always noted that the Rainbow Theatre incident left marks that never fully disappeared. Number 6. Selena Quintanilla Perez. Yolanda Saldivar was not a stranger. She had been a trusted figure inside Selena's world for years, serving as president of her fan club and eventually managing her boutiques, which made what happened on March 31st, 1995, all the more shattering. After confronting Saldivar over evidence of financial theft, Selena was shot at a Days Inn in Corpus Christi, Texas. She was 23 years old. The question of whether Saldivar qualifies as a fan is more than answered by her origin story. She founded the fan club herself. She had inserted herself into Selena's professional life specifically because of her devotion. Selena's death sent shockwaves far beyond the Tejano music world. Fans gathered by the thousands in the days that followed. Investigations into Saldivar's financial records revealed she had embezzled around $30,000 from Selena's businesses, and it was Selena's attempt to recover documents proving that theft which brought her to the motel room where she was shot. The trial lasted only 2 weeks, and Saldivar was convicted in October of 1995. Her music reached entirely new audiences in the years after her passing, and her cultural footprint only grew. Saldivar was convicted of first-degree murder and remains incarcerated. Selena remains one of the most beloved performers in American music history. If you have made it this far into the countdown, we would love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. The stories just keep coming, and the next few might surprise you. Number 5. G.G. Allin. Some performers invite confrontation. G.G. Allin did not merely invite it, he built his entire identity around it. Allin's shows throughout the 1980s and into the early 90s were exercises in theatrical warfare. He regularly bloodied himself on stage, threw objects at audiences, and expected to be hit back. Fans obliged. Bottles flew, punches were exchanged. At numerous venues across the country, shows ended in brawls that spilled into the street. Allin frequently performed while visibly injured from previous nights. Classifying Allin's incidents as attacks may require a generous reading of the word, since he actively courted the chaos. But he was genuinely struck, cut, and physically harmed by audience members on many documented occasions. Several shows ended with him requiring medical attention. Whether the violence was performance or reality was often unclear, and that ambiguity was precisely the point. He died in 1993, not from a fan attack, but from a drug overdose, which many who knew him found only slightly surprising. Number 4. Ozzy Osbourne. The Reading Festival in England has always prided itself on being rowdy, but the 1980 edition was particularly unkind to Ozzy Osbourne, who had recently launched his solo career after parting ways with Black Sabbath. The crowd pelted him relentlessly with eggs, fruit, and muddied debris throughout his performance. This was not Ozzy's only encounter with projectile-minded fans. At multiple shows during the early years of his solo run, audiences expressed their skepticism, or in some cases outright hostility, by throwing whatever was at hand. The infamous incident involving a bat at a Des Moines show in January of 1982 began with a fan throwing a presumably rubber prop onto the stage. Ozzy, believing it was a toy, bit down on it. It was not a toy. The bat was alive, and Ozzy was rushed to a hospital immediately after the show to receive a series of rabies injections, a medical protocol that requires multiple painful doses administered over several weeks. Ozzy survived that episode, along with the Reading Festival humiliation, and eventually won over most of his critics. By the late 1980s, he had become one of rock's most enduring figures. His reputation for surviving the unexpected, thoroughly, if painfully, established. Number 3. The Beatles. It sounds harmless at first. Jelly babies, the soft British candy George Harrison had mentioned enjoying in an early interview, became the gift of choice for millions of Beatles fans at concerts throughout 1963 and 1964. The problem was scale. When tens of thousands of fans threw handfuls of hard sugar candy at high velocity from every angle of a venue, it stopped being charming almost immediately. George Harrison later described the experience as genuinely unpleasant, comparing the impact to being pelted with tiny rocks. The candy hit eyes, hands, and faces. The Beatles tried to discourage the practice publicly, but the tradition only spread as the band became more famous and the crowds grew larger. By the time Beatlemania reached North America, American fans had substituted jelly beans, which are considerably harder and more aerodynamic than their British counterparts, making matters worse. The sheer absurdity of 4 of the world's most famous musicians being physically stung by fan candy every night of a tour remains one of rock history's most peculiar recurring hazards. Number 2. Sid Vicious and the Sex Pistols. Gobbing was the term. British punk audiences in the mid to late 1970s expressed enthusiasm by spitting on performers, a custom that the performers themselves largely accepted as part of the deal. The Sex Pistols dealt with spitting at virtually every show. They also dealt with bottles. Sid Vicious, who joined the band in early 1977, bore more than his share. At shows across England, glass was thrown from the audience with enough force to draw blood. Sid was struck on multiple occasions, sometimes visibly, sometimes while barely flinching, which only added to his mythology. The line between ritual and assault was something punk deliberately blurred. Fans and bands occupied the same physical and emotional space in a way that mainstream rock had never attempted. That intimacy came with real physical cost. Several Sex Pistols shows ended early due to the volume of incoming debris. The band's brief incendiary run through the United Kingdom in late 1976 and 1977 left a permanent mark on music culture and a fair number of bruises along the way. Number 1. Rick Springfield. Not every fan attack involves a weapon or a vendetta. Sometimes it is simply the uncontrollable excitement of a crowd in the presence of someone they adore. In August of 2012, Rick Springfield was performing at the Iowa State Fair when an enthusiastic fan in the front row grabbed his leg and pulled. Springfield went over the edge of the stage and landed hard, breaking his tailbone. He finished the show. That last detail matters. Springfield, then in his early 60s, climbed back up, took a moment to compose himself, and kept playing. The fan almost certainly had no harmful intent. It was pure, unfiltered enthusiasm gone slightly wrong in the way that sometimes happens when large numbers of devoted people get close enough to touch someone they have loved from a distance for decades. Springfield later discussed the incident with characteristic good humor. The moment captured something real about the relationship between performers and their audiences, a bond so powerful it occasionally, literally, knocks you off your feet.